Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. I hope that you enjoyed celebrating the 4th of July and that your month is kicking off to a good start. Don't forget to sign up and register for camp. It is next week, the 16th through the 19th. It's free to attend and we have a ton of fun stuff planned. So be sure to check it out. If you have any questions, go back and watch the video that I posted before this video where I basically break down what the camp is going to be, what it's all about, how we're going to address COVID, things like that. So be sure to check that out. And yeah, so with that, we are going to go ahead and dive into our third installment in our series in the book of Daniel called Change and Consistency. And so far in this series, we have talked about what it's like to enter new seasons of your life, what it's like to face new challenges, how we should handle these things, and all of that. And so today we're going to be kind of stepping further into that and looking at something that is a constant in our lives, so going into that consistency area, and something that's consistent no matter how difficult or challenging or lonely things may seem. Because I think a lot of times in life we'll go through things and we'll go through times of our life and it'll seem like, oh my gosh, I'm the only person who is dealing with this, or I'm the only person who is facing this, or you face some really big struggle and it feels like you have no one to turn to, or you feel like no one will be able to relate to this, or you think like, oh, I can just handle this on my own. I don't want to burden anyone, or I don't want to drag anyone else into this, so let me just handle it on my own and it'll be fine. And I think this is something that all of us struggle with at some point in our lives. And so today we are going to be looking at the fact that, contrary to popular belief, we are never truly alone, ever. And so to talk about this, today we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 3, to be looking at something that happened to Daniel's three friends when they were facing one of the greatest challenges of their lives and one of the scariest things that anyone could be experiencing. And we're going to look at how that one thing, that never truly being alone, how that remained constant throughout it in a really unexpected way. So, like I said, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. And let's go ahead and grab your Bibles and turn there and let's see what's going on. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing fire. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So, in this first part of the chapter, we see that King Nebuchadnezzar has decided to build a gold statue that's almost bigger than his ego and forces everyone to worship it anytime they hear any sort of music. Now, to give you a little context about just how big this statue is, 60 cubits high is approximately like 90 feet tall. That's like a 9-story building. Gold statue of himself. And he wants everyone to just fall down and worship it anytime they hear any sort of music. And on top of that, he intends to kill anyone who doesn't obey this. So, like, Homeboy is really pushing the limits. Now, this is a major no-go for the Israelites, or really any followers of God, because this is straight up idolatry. And if you don't know, idolatry is placing anything in your life equal to or higher than God. It means like you're worshiping pretty much anything else other than God. And this is bad. I mean, literally the first 2 commandments that God gives Moses in Exodus for the Israelites are, "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." And that's in Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 through 6. So literally, like, the first 2 commandments are like, you'll have no other gods before me, and you're not going to make any sort of, like, image or statue or anything like that and worship it or, like, bow down to it. And that's exactly what King Nebuchadnezzar is doing and wanting the Israelites to do. So now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are getting called out, and they're going to be in some serious trouble because they're choosing not to disobey God's word and God's commandments, and they're not wanting to worship the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. They're not wanting to break those commandments. And so we can really relate this to times in our lives. We can relate this to when we see people doing worldly things or see people doing earthly things, and we want to either fit in or join them, or we like face a desire to like not want to cause conflict or to like appeal to them, or sometimes the earthly things that they're doing seems really fun and we want to be able to do that. Or you can relate this to if you're faced with any sort of like big dilemma where it's like an ethical problem of like, oh, should I or should I not do this? And basically you can relate this to if you're in any situation where you're having to face it head on. You can't find a way around it. You can't avoid it. You have to face it. And it's difficult. It's overwhelming. Again, it makes you feel alone and overwhelmed and consumed and just like, I'm the only one who's having to deal with this. I'm the only one who's facing this. No one's going to really understand this. And it's easier for me to just handle it on my own. That's what this situation feels like. And so it's not fun. It's not easy. It's not something that we like look forward to in life. But so what do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decide to do in response to it? How do they handle this coming at them? How do they handle this being called out, being isolated, being picked apart? These freaking astrologers decided to call out the 3 of them and be like, hey, those 3, they're not doing what you want them to do. So they're being isolated and they're being separated from everyone else. How do they handle that? How do they handle dealing with all that? Well, let's keep reading and let's see what they do. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot that the flames of fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Dang. So here we see that King Nebuchadnezzar calls out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for not worshiping his statue, and basically gives them 2 choices. He says either worship it right here and now, or you're going to get thrown into the furnace. Now, these are not great options. The odds aren't seeming super great. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego give one of the greatest responses to an adversity like this in the Bible. This is one of my favorite quotes of Scripture. And they say, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." And we see that in chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. So, what we see here, what we see that they're doing, is that they face the challenge head on and they are trusting God fully. They acknowledge that God may decide not to deliver them. They acknowledge that things may not work out the way that they want it to. But they trust that God is the God of all things and that he is the greatest authority. And so they trust that he will handle the situation exactly how it needs to be handled. They say that he has the power to deliver them out of a blazing furnace and from death. So they refuse to disobey God, and instead they put their full trust in him. I think this is really cool and really powerful because they're just giving it all to God, and they're saying, he may not handle it the way that we want him to. He may let us die. And I think that that's something that's really important to acknowledge, because I think sometimes we treat God like he's this sort of genie in a bottle of oh, well, he'll do this thing. He won't let me face this thing. But sometimes God does allow that to happen. And it's all for the greater good. It's all for his great plan that he has. And I think it's really amazing that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are trusting that. They're saying, we have full faith that even if he decides not to deliver us, that it's okay. It's for a reason. And then on top of that, they're saying that they're not going to let anything come in between them and God. They are going to keep God highest. And that's so important. And then again, they're on top of that saying too that like he straight up has the power to take us out of this furnace alive. Like if anyone can do it, it's him. And so all this really upsets King Nebuchadnezzar. And so he decides to have them punished as severely as possible. He cranks up that furnace 7 times as hot as it normally is. He has his strongest soldiers come and tie them up. And he has them tossed in there. And I mean, it's so hot that literally the soldiers carrying them just like combust on the way in. So again, odds aren't great. Things don't really seem to be working in their favor. And they seem pretty alone. They seem like it's really just the 3 of them and no one else. So what happens? What comes of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faithfulness to and trust in God? Let's read the rest of the chapter and find out. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then King Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So here we see that not only do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survive the fire, but while they are in it, God himself appears in the form of Jesus and comes and joins them in the fire. You know, we know from that it's not just like a normal angel, because anytime angels are described other places in the Bible, they don't look human. But this is human, and it says like a son of God. And so this is alluding to Jesus, the Son of God. And he comes and he protects them from any and all harm and delivers them straight out of the fire and from death. They weren't alone in the fire. They had God with them in there. And King Nebuchadnezzar is so shocked by this and so impressed by this that he acknowledges that God alone must have had a hand in all of it, and that God is superior to any of these other little gods. And he then decides to promote Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. So what we see here is that we are never alone. God is always with us, even in our most difficult and trying circumstances. God never just leaves us hanging or leaves us to fend for ourselves. When we have full faith in God, he's always there with us in every circumstance. He will always personally deliver us out of every single situation. And again, on top of this, we see that God appears here in the form of Jesus. And this shows that Jesus is the one who comes and saves us from death. He saves us from an eternity spent in hell and separated from God. He steps into the fire, and through his sacrifice, he delivers us from eternal death. So this is such beautiful foreshadowing of the gospel and what's to come. And this again just emphasizes that we are never alone. So now, how do we take this and apply what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to our lives? And the simple, easy, cheesy, but honest answer is to just have full faith and trust in God. Even when it seems impossible, even when it seems unreasonable, even when it seems easier to give in, even when it seems easier to run away, even when it seems like it's better to just take over and do it yourself, even when it seems like you have no one to help you through, just have full faith and trust in God. Always. In all situations. He's always with you and will always be there for you, no matter what. So, whether you are facing a really difficult time in your life, or are feeling like you are completely alone, or feel like nobody understands what you are going through, or feel like you just need to take over handling things for yourself because you think you're the only one who can do it, remember that you always have God. Through all the ups and all the downs, He is always there for you. You are never truly alone. There's always another in the fire with you.